The countdown didn't start when the clock hit 60. It started the moment he hesitated. The chamber hummed with a low mechanical pulse, steady and indifferent, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything alive. The air carried a faint metallic tang mixed with sterilized ozone, clean enough to erase any trace of what had happened here before. Captain Ethan Cole stood exactly 6 feet from the restraint platform, boots planted on the cold steel floor, his HUD flickering softly against the inside of his visor. Execution protocol ready. The text hovered in pale blue, waiting. Patient. The overhead lights cast sharp, white lines across the room. No shadows deep enough to hide in. No corners soft enough to forget. Everything here was designed for clarity, for finality, for decisions that could not be undone. The alien prisoner stood motionless at the center, wrists secured in energy cuffs that glowed faintly around her skin, a soft blue shimmer against a deeper shade of cerulean. Her posture was straight, almost regal, like she had chosen how she would be seen in this moment. Her silver eyes reflected the light without flinching, without searching for escape, without asking for anything at all. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound muted inside his helmet. His gloved fingers hovered near the control panel mounted to his forearm. One command. That was all it took. A single confirmation, a single action that would align him with every order he had ever followed, every mission completed, every name filed away in reports that reduced lives to numbers and outcomes. The system chimed once, soft but insistent. Final authorization required. He didn't move. Not yet. Something in the stillness pressed against him harder than any battlefield ever had. No incoming fire. No chaos. Just silence stretched thin across seconds that felt heavier than they should. The alien tilted her head just slightly, studying him with a calm that didn't match the situation. "You're late," she said, her voice smooth, almost conversational. The translator rendered it perfectly into his ear. No distortion, no delay, just clarity. Ethan blinked, a reflex more than a reaction. "Clock says I'm right on time," he replied, his voice even, practiced, the kind of tone that didn't give anything away. Her gaze didn't shift, didn't soften. "No," she said quietly. "You were supposed to decide already." The words settled between them, not accusatory, not mocking, just observed. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes flicked to the countdown projected in the air beside her. 0:52. Numbers dropping with mechanical precision. Each second a clean cut through hesitation. He had read the file. Every line of it. War criminal. High risk. Execute on sight. The words had been clear, absolute. But the footage attached, the fragments of data, they hadn't felt as certain. Something about them had been off. Too clean. Too aligned. Like a story that had already been decided before the evidence was arranged to support it. He shifted his weight slightly, the armor responding with a soft whir of servos compensating for the movement. "Any last words?" he asked, the line automatic, procedural, something he had said before without thinking. The alien's lips curved just enough to suggest something close to a smile, but not quite. "You want me to make this easier for you," she said, her eyes locking onto his, steady, unyielding. "I'm not here for easy," Ethan answered, though the words felt thinner than usual. She held his gaze for another second, then spoke, softer this time. "Then don't pretend you believe what they told you." The chamber seemed quieter after that, as if even the machines had paused to listen. 0:41. The numbers continued their descent, indifferent to doubt, indifferent to truth. Ethan's finger hovered closer to the command interface. Close enough now that a single motion would complete the sequence. In the moment, restore the world to something simple again. But his hand didn't move. Not yet, because for the first time since he stepped into the chamber, the system wasn't the loudest thing in the room. His hesitation was. The system chimed again, sharper this time, less patient, as if the machine itself had noticed the delay. 0:36. The digits pulsed faintly in the air, each second measured with perfect indifference. Ethan Cole shifted his focus from the countdown to the data panel still hovering at the edge of his visor. The prisoner file remained open, lines of text stacked with clinical certainty, charges, locations, casualty estimates, all formatted in clean military structure, but the timestamps did not align the way they should have. Not exactly, a fraction of a second off in each sequence, small enough to ignore, precise enough to matter. His eyes narrowed slightly. The system did not make mistakes like that. Not at this level. Not with this kind of case. He raised his wrist, fingers moving across the interface with controlled precision, initiating a secondary scan. The chamber lights did not change, but his visor dimmed slightly as layers of hidden data surfaced beneath the official record, fragments of raw footage, unedited telemetry, broken signal logs that had never been included in the final report. The alien watched him in silence now, her earlier composure unchanged, but her attention sharpened, as if she could feel the shift in the room even without seeing what he saw. Curiosity is a dangerous habit for your kind, she said quietly. Ethan did not look at her yet. So is blind obedience, he replied, his voice low, steady. The system responded with a warning tone. Access level restricted, but he pushed past it. His clearance was enough. Barely. The hidden footage flickered into view, grainy at first, then stabilizing. What it showed did not match the summary, not clean strikes, not deliberate destruction, but chaos, interference, signals overlapping, something else present in the frame that had been removed from the official version, something that had not been identified. Ethan felt a slow tension build in his chest, not fear, not yet, but recognition. The kind that came when a story started to fall apart under its own weight. 029. The countdown continued, relentless. The chamber hummed a little louder as the execution system adjusted its internal cycles, preparing for activation. You see it now, the alien said, her voice softer than before, not triumphant, not pleading, just certain. Ethan finally turned his head toward her, studying her face without the filter of assumption. Her expression had not changed, but there was something different in the way she held his gaze, less like a prisoner, more like someone waiting for a decision that mattered beyond this room. You were not there alone, he said, more to confirm than to accuse. She inclined her head slightly. No, she answered, but they needed someone to blame who would not argue back. The words settled heavily, not dramatic, just true in a way that was difficult to ignore. Ethan glanced back at the data, then at the countdown. 024, time compressing now, the margin for hesitation shrinking with every passing second. His hand hovered closer to the execution control again, the weight of protocol pressing in from all sides. Training, command structure, expectation, all built to eliminate exactly this kind of uncertainty. The comm channel crackled softly in his ear, a voice from command, controlled, distant. Captain Cole, status update. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on the alien, on the stillness she carried even now. Final authorization pending. He replied after a moment, neutral, precise. The voice on the other end paused just long enough to register the delay. You are within acceptable parameters, it said though. The tone had sharpened slightly. Proceed. The channel went silent again, leaving only the hum of the chamber and the steady descent of the clock. 018. Ethan exhaled slowly, the air inside his helmet warm against his face. His finger moved closer, almost touching the command surface. One motion. That was all it would take. Everything would resolve. The doubt, the questions, the inconsistencies. All of it would disappear into a completed action. But the footage lingered in his mind, the gaps. The edits, the parts that had been removed because they did not fit the narrative he had been given. He looked at her again. Really looked this time. Not as a target, not as an assignment, but as a variable the system had tried to simplify. If I stop this, he said quietly, they will not let either of us walk away clean. Her eyes did not waver. I never expected clean, she replied. And for the first time since he entered the chamber, Ethan understood that this was not about following orders anymore. It was about deciding which version of the truth he was willing to live with as the clock dropped to 012. 012. The digits burned brighter now, no longer just a measure of time, but a line that could not be crossed twice. Ethan Cole held his hand just above the execution interface, close enough that the system registered intent, a faint ring of light forming under his fingertip as if urging him forward. The chamber tightened around that moment, every surface reflecting the same sterile certainty. Complete the action, close the file, restore order. His breathing slowed, controlled, but not calm, not anymore, because calm belonged to decisions already made, and this one was not yet. The alien did not move, not even a shift in posture, but her voice came again, quieter than before, almost lost beneath the hum of the machinery. They designed this room so you would not think, she said. Only act. Ethan's jaw flexed slightly. He had trained in rooms like this, environments built to reduce hesitation, to strip away doubt, until only execution remained. Efficient, clean, unquestioned. But the doubt was already here. It had been here the moment he saw the fracture in the data, the moment the story stopped making sense. 009. The system chimed. Sharper now. Warning. Final window approaching. The message pulsed against his visor. Command would be watching, monitoring the delay, calculating risk, preparing contingencies. His name would already be flagged, his hesitation recorded, analyzed, judged. Ethan lowered his hand slightly, just enough to break the interface lock. The ring of light vanished, replaced by a colder glow. The system did not like uncertainty. It preferred binary outcomes. Yes or no, execute or abort. Nothing in between. Why did you not run? He asked suddenly, the question cutting through protocol before he could stop it. The alien's eyes shifted just a fraction, not surprised, not defensive, just present. Because running would have confirmed their version of me, she answered. And I am tired of living inside someone else's conclusion. The words settled into him heavier than any command he had received. 007. The countdown continued. Relentless. Ethan's gaze dropped briefly to the data again. The inconsistencies, the missing frames, the unseen presence in the footage, all of it pointing to something larger than a single prisoner, larger than a single decision. This was not just about her. It never had been. It was about a system that needed a result more than it needed the truth. The comm channel crackled again. No preamble this time. Just a voice, firmer, closer to the edge. Captain Cole, execute immediately. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. Authority layered over expectation. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, not to escape, but to choose. When he opened them, the countdown read 005. His hand moved again, but not toward the execution command. Instead, his fingers shifted across the interface, sliding into a secondary panel buried beneath the primary controls, a function rarely used, rarely even acknowledged. Manual override. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if recognizing the deviation, then responded with a low warning tone. Unauthorized action detected. Ethan did not stop, his movements precise now. Deliberate. Each input. Placed with the certainty that had been missing seconds ago, the alien watched him. And for the first time, something changed in her expression. Not fear, not relief, but something quieter, something like recognition. 003. The chamber lights flickered once, subtle, but enough to signal that the system was no longer in full control. Ethan's voice came steady, almost calm now. If I do this, he said, not looking at her. You do not hesitate. Her answer came without delay. I will not. 002. The warning tones grew sharper, overlapping signals cascading through the chamber. Command would see it now. They would know. 001. Ethan pressed the override. Not a dramatic motion, not a moment of force, just a quiet, irreversible choice. The countdown froze. The hum of the execution system stuttered, then dropped into a lower, uncertain frequency. Door, his HUD now flooded with cascading alerts. Override detected. Command lock initiated. Security response yen route. The words stacked over each other in urgent red text. The system was correcting itself, reasserting control. He had seconds, maybe less, before this room became something very different. He reached up and removed his helmet, the seals releasing with a soft mechanical click. Cool air brushing against his face, unfiltered, real. He met her eyes without the barrier now, and for the first time, there was no translation delay, no system between them, just two beings standing in the same uncertain space. Can you move? He asked, direct, practical. She flexed her fingers once, then nodded. I was never the problem, she answered, and there was a faint edge to her tone now, not anger, but clarity, like someone who had waited too long to speak plainly. The door behind Ethan gave a sharp metallic thud as external locks engaged, reinforcing, sealing the chamber further. The system was isolating the anomaly, containing the error. Him. Ethan glanced at the panel beside the door, its interface flickering between access denied and partial override states, the system fighting itself. "We do not have much time," he said, stepping toward it, his fingers moving quickly across the controls, bypassing layers that were never meant to be accessed under pressure. The alien moved closer, not crowding him, but close enough that he could feel her presence beside him, steady, composed, not asking for direction, just ready. "They will not let this stay contained," she said, her eyes tracking the subtle changes in the room, the lights, the sound, the shift in air pressure as systems recalibrated. Ethan nodded once. "They do not have to," he replied. "We just have to be gone before they decide how to fix it." The panel sparked briefly, then stabilized, the lock sequence stuttering as his override pushed through. Partial access granted. The text appeared for half a second before flickering again. Enough, it would have to be. The alarms outside grew louder now, footsteps echoing faintly through distant corridors, coordinated, precise, closing in. Ethan placed his hand flat against the panel, finalizing the bypass. The door responded with a low, reluctant hum, the seals beginning to disengage, slow, resistant, but moving. He stepped back slightly, giving space, his eyes flicking once more to her. "When it opens, you go," he said, not as an order, but as a fact. She held his gaze for a brief moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, not fully, but something close enough to act on. The door split down the center with a narrow line of light, widening inch by inch. The corridor beyond revealed in fragments, harsh red emergency lighting, shadows stretching long across the floor, the sound of approaching boots growing clearer with each second. The system had not failed, it had adapted, and now it was coming. Ethan shifted his stance slightly, not defensive, not aggressive, just ready. The door opened wide enough to pass through, and the moment hung there, fragile and irreversible, the kind that did not come twice. The alien moved first, a smooth, decisive step toward the opening. Then she paused, just for a fraction of a second, turning her head back toward him. "You are not what they said you were," she said quietly. And then she was gone into the red-lit corridor, leaving Ethan Cole, standing in a room that no longer belonged to him, listening as the alarms grew louder and the consequences of his choice finally began to arrive. The corridor swallowed her the moment she crossed the threshold, red emergency lights pulsing in slow intervals that stretched shadows across the steel walls like something alive. Ethan Cole remained where he was for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, just long enough to register the absence she left behind. Then he moved, not chasing, not hesitating, but stepping into the same uncertain space she had entered. The door behind him shuddered as the system attempted to reassert control, the panels along the frame flickering between lock states. Confused, delayed, he slipped through before it could decide. The corridor air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of recycled filtration and overheated circuits. Alarms echoed in layered tones, not chaotic but coordinated. Each frequency assigned a purpose, a direction, a response. His HUD recalibrated instantly, mapping the hallway in pale blue outlines. Security units converging from 3 directions, estimated arrival in under 30 seconds. He turned left, not because it was obvious, but because it was not, the kind of path that avoided central routes, maintenance corridors, blind angles. The alien moved ahead of him with quiet efficiency, her steps measured, light, but not hurried. She did not look back, she did not need to. She already knew he was following. "You know this place," Ethan said under his breath as he closed the distance between them. She glanced sideways for a fraction of a second. "I learned what they did not want me to see," she replied, her voice steady despite the rising tension around them. A panel above them sparked briefly, then went dark, the lighting dropping to a deeper red, emergency mode tightening its grip. Ethan's gaze flicked to the ceiling, then back to the corridor ahead. "They are locking sections down," he said, more to himself than to her. "They will funnel us," she answered, already adjusting her path, turning sharply into a narrower passage that branched off the main corridor. The space here was tighter, lined with exposed conduits and maintenance panels, the hum of the station louder, closer, like the structure itself was aware of them moving through it. Ethan followed without question, his instincts aligning with hers not because he trusted her completely, but because the alternative was worse. The sound of approaching boots echoed from behind them now, distant but closing, measured, controlled, not rushed, which made it more dangerous. These were not panicked responses. These were calculated ones. "Why help me?" she asked suddenly, not slowing, not turning. The question slipped between them as naturally as the sound of their footsteps. Ethan did not answer immediately, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead, calculating distance, exits, time. "Because the file was wrong," he said finally, the words simple, stripped of anything unnecessary. She shook her head slightly. "That is not enough for your kind," she said. "You follow orders even when they are wrong." Ethan's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, not in anger, but in recognition. "Not always," he replied, and there was something heavier in that answer, something that had been building long before this moment. They reached a junction where 3 paths split, each marked with flickering indicators, the system trying to update faster than it could stabilize. The alien slowed just enough to glance at the displays, then chose the center path without hesitation. "This leads to external access," she said. "If it is still open." Ethan nodded once, adjusting his pace to match hers. "If it is not," he said, "we make it open." The alarms shifted again, a new tone layering over the others. Sharper, more focused, the kind that signaled containment rather than alert. The station was no longer just responding. It was adapting, closing the gaps, predicting movement, anticipating choices. Ethan felt the pressure of it now, not physical, but structural, like the environment itself was tightening around them. The corridor ahead narrowed further, the lighting dimming to intermittent pulses, their shadows appearing and disappearing with each flash. The alien slowed again, just slightly, enough that he drew even with her. For a brief moment they moved side by side, not prisoner and guard, not enemy and soldier, just two figures navigating the same collapsing system. "If we reach the exit," she said quietly, "they will not stop searching." Ethan kept his eyes forward. "They do not have to stop," he answered, his voice calm despite the rising tension. "They just have to be too late." The corridor bent sharply ahead, disappearing into deeper shadow, and without another word, they moved into it. Together, leaving behind the last place where the system had still believed it was in control. The corridor tightened into a narrow spine of metal and shadow, the overhead lights now failing in uneven pulses that turned movement into fragments. Ethan Cole slowed just enough to listen, not to the alarms, not to the systems recalibrating around them, but to the subtle shift beneath it all, the pattern of pursuit, the way the station was learning, adapting, closing distance without rushing. "They are predicting our path now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the pressure building. Around them, Kaylee's did not look at him, her eyes fixed ahead as she adjusted her pace by a fraction. "Then we stop being predictable," she replied, her tone calm, almost analytical, as if this were a problem to solve rather than a situation to survive. The passage opened slightly into a junction filled with maintenance conduits, exposed wiring running along the walls in tight bundles, faint heat radiating from them. The air here was warmer, heavier, carrying the scent of insulation and overworked systems. Ethan's HUD flickered again, the map updating in broken segments, sections of the station going dark as internal systems shut down to contain the breach. "They are cutting power to isolate us," he said, scanning the layout. "Which means fewer eyes," Kaylee's answered, turning sharply toward a maintenance hatch recessed into the wall. It was half concealed behind a panel that had not fully sealed. She reached it in 2 steps, her fingers moving across the manual latch with practiced familiarity. The hatch resisted at first, then gave with a low metallic release, revealing a vertical shaft beyond, narrow, dimly lit by a faint emergency strip running along its spine. "This was not in your official map," Ethan noted, stepping closer. She glanced at him briefly. "Official maps are for those who follow rules," she said, then began to descend without hesitation. Her movements controlled, efficient, using the internal rungs with ease. Ethan followed immediately, sealing the hatch behind them as best he could. The sound of it closing was softer than expected, swallowed by the structure around them. The shaft enclosed them in a different kind of silence, the alarms now distant, muted by layers of reinforced metal. replaced by the low vibration of the station's core systems running beneath their feet. Each step downward measured in inches, deliberate. Careful, Ethan counted without thinking, 10 feet, 20, 30. The shaft angled slightly as it descended, redirecting toward the outer sections of the station. Where does this lead? He asked, his voice low, controlled. Kaylee's paused briefly on a rung below him, just enough to answer. External maintenance ring, she said. From there, we can reach the docking perimeter. Ethan absorbed that, adjusting his expectations. That is where they will expect us to go, he said. She resumed moving, her voice carrying upward. Yes, she replied. Which is why we will not stay there long. The shaft narrowed further, forcing them into single-file movement with little room to adjust. The air cooled again as they descended deeper, condensation forming along the metal edges, faint droplets catching the dim light. Ethan's grip tightened slightly on the rungs, not from fear, but from focus. Every movement now mattered, every sound carried. Above them, faint vibrations signaled movement in the corridors they had left behind. The response teams adjusting, rerouting, following patterns that were already becoming outdated. You knew this place before they captured you, Ethan said, not as a question, but as a realization forming into words. Kaylee stopped again, this time for a fraction longer, her head tilting just enough that he could see the edge of her profile in the dim light. I was not always their prisoner, she said quietly, then continued downward, the statement hanging in the confined space between them, adding weight to everything that had come before. The shaft opened slightly near the bottom, the faint outline of another hatch visible below, its edges lined with worn markings, signs of use that had not been logged, not recorded. Ethan felt the shift again, the sense that they were moving through something older than the system currently trying to control it, something that existed before the rules were written, before the files were edited. Kaylee's reached the lower hatch and placed her hand against it, pausing just long enough to listen, not to the alarms, but to the silence beyond. Then she looked up at him, her eyes steady, clearer now in the faint light. From here, she said, we do not get a second chance. Ethan met her gaze. No hesitation left in it now, just decision. We did not have one to begin with, he replied, and together, they prepared to step into whatever waited on the other side. The hatch opened with a slow, reluctant shift, metal scraping softly against metal as if the station itself resisted what they were about to do. Kaylee's pushed it just far enough to slip through, then paused, her body half turned as she listened, not for alarms, but for absence, the kind of silence that meant no one was waiting on the other side. Ethan followed a second later, sealing the hatch behind them with a quiet press that left no clear trace of their passage. The space beyond was different, wider but emptier, a circular maintenance ring that wrapped along the outer hull of the station. The lighting here was dim and uneven, long strips of emergency glow casting pale reflections across the curved metal floor. Beyond the narrow, reinforced windows, space stretched out in absolute black, broken only by distant stars and the faint reflection of the station's own structure. It felt colder here, not in temperature alone, but in design. This was not a place meant for people. It was a place meant to be accessed, used, then left behind. We are close, Kaylee said, her voice carrying slightly in the open space. Ethan stepped beside her, his eyes scanning the ring, counting access points, noting the sealed maintenance doors spaced at regular intervals, each one marked with faded identifiers. Close to what? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. She moved forward, her steps quiet against the metal surface. Freedom, she said simply, but there was no relief in her tone, only clarity, as if freedom was not an escape, but a responsibility waiting on the other side. Ethan followed, his pace measured, his mind already adjusting to the new environment. Fewer places to hide, fewer angles to break line of sight, but also fewer control points for the system to dominate. His HUD flickered again, then stabilized just long enough to show a new set of alerts. External perimeter breach protocol initiated. The words pulsed once before dissolving into static. They are sealing the outer ring, he said, glancing toward the nearest access door, its panel already shifting into a locked state. Kaylee's did not slow. Instead, she adjusted her path slightly, angling toward a section of the ring where the lighting was weakest, where the structure itself showed signs of older design. Less polished, less integrated into the current system, they built this station in layers, she said. The newer systems do not always control the older ones. Ethan understood immediately. Not every part of a structure evolved at the same pace. Some pieces remained, hidden in plain sight, functioning outside the primary network. And you know where those pieces are, he said. She nodded once, stopping in front of a panel that looked no different than the others at first glance, but up close. The wear patterns told a different story, the edges slightly more worn. The access interface mechanical rather than fully digital. She knelt, her fingers tracing along a seam that was nearly invisible, then pressed inward with precise pressure. The panel shifted, not with a hiss or a glow, but with a simple, mechanical click, revealing a recessed compartment behind it. Ethan crouched beside her, watching as she reached inside, her movements careful, deliberate, like someone who had done this before. "What is this?" he asked quietly. She did not look at him as she answered. "An exit they forgot to remove," she said, her hand closing around something within the compartment. She pulled it free, a small device, compact, unremarkable at first glance, but the way she held it suggested otherwise. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "That is not station issued," he said. She met his eyes briefly, and for the first time, there was something almost human in her expression, not just composure, but memory. "No," she replied. "It is older than their authority here." The alarms shifted again, closer now, the sound carrying along the curved ring, footsteps approaching from both directions this time. Coordinated, converging. The system had learned enough. It was no longer guessing. Ethan stood, his posture adjusting instinctively, not defensive, not aggressive, but ready for what came next. "We do not have much time," he said. Kaylee's rose beside him, the device now active in her hand, a faint pulse of light responding to her touch. "We do not need much," she answered, turning toward the outer edge of the ring where the reinforced window curved along the hull. Beyond it, the void waited, silent and absolute. Ethan followed her gaze for a fraction of a second, then back to her, understanding forming without needing explanation. "That is not a door," he said. She stepped closer to the window, the device humming softly now, resonating with something deeper than the station's systems. "No," she said quietly. "It is something better." The footsteps grew louder, the shadows at both ends of the ring stretching toward them as the response teams closed in, and for a brief moment, suspended between the structure behind them and the emptiness beyond, Ethan Cole realized that the next choice would not just define what they escaped, but what they were willing to become once they did. The device in Kaylee's hand pulsed once, then again, each rhythm slightly out of sync with the station's systems, like a heartbeat that did not belong to this place. The faint light it emitted spread across the reinforced window in thin, shifting patterns, as if it were searching for something beneath the surface. Ethan Cole stood just behind her, his gaze flicking between the expanding glow and the two ends of the maintenance ring where shadows were beginning to take form. The response teams were close now, their movement precise, controlled, not rushing, not hesitating. They knew exactly where this ended. "That will not break the window," Ethan said, his voice calm, not questioning, just stating what the structure itself confirmed. The reinforced surface was designed to withstand external pressure, internal impact, anything short of catastrophic force. Kaylee's did not turn, her focus fixed entirely on the device. "It does not need to," she replied, her fingers adjusting their grip. The light intensifying, becoming less diffuse, more defined, a narrow line forming where none had existed before, a seam that was not part of the station's design. The air around them shifted slightly, a subtle change in pressure, a distortion that made the edges of the window seem less solid, less certain. Ethan felt it more than saw it. The way the environment hesitated, like reality itself was being asked to reconsider its shape. "You are not opening a door," he said quietly, understanding beginning to form. Kaylee's voice came softer now, almost reflective. "No," she said. "I am reminding it that it was never closed." The footsteps at both ends of the ring grew louder, distinct now, coordinated units moving into position. The red emergency lights cast their silhouettes long across the curved floor, converging, narrowing the space. Ethan shifted his stance slightly, placing himself between Kaylee's and the nearest approach, not as a shield, not as a sacrifice, but as a delay, a moment bought with presence rather than force. His eyes tracked the distance automatically, calculating seconds, angles, possibilities, none of them favorable, none of them necessary. Not if she finished what she started. The device emitted a sharper tone, a frequency that seemed to resonate through the metal beneath their feet. The seam along the window widened by a fraction of an inch, not enough to see through, but enough to feel, the cold beyond pressing inward without breaking, without rushing, just existing on the other side of something that was no longer fully solid. Once it opens, Kaylee said, her voice steady despite the rising tension, it will not stay that way for long. Ethan nodded once, his gaze still forward, still measuring. Then we do not stay either, he replied. The shadows at the far end of the ring stopped advancing, spreading instead, forming a line rather than a point, containment, not pursuit. They were not trying to reach them quickly. They were trying to make sure there was nowhere left to go. The system had adapted again, learned again. Kaylee's hands steadied on the device, the light now a focused arc tracing the invisible boundary in front of them. The seam expanded further, a narrow opening forming, not jagged, not broken, but smooth, precise, as if it had always been meant to exist. Beyond it, the darkness of space was no longer filtered through reinforced glass. It was present, immediate, vast. Ethan felt the pull of it, not physical, but conceptual, the understanding that one step forward would remove every layer of control the station had tried to enforce. This is your only chance, Kaylee said, and there was something different in her tone now, not urgency, not command, but recognition, as if she understood the weight of what she was asking without needing to explain it. Ethan did not hesitate this time, not because the choice was easy, but because it was already made. He stepped closer, aligning himself with the opening, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second. No words, no confirmation, just the shared understanding that there was no version of this where they both remained unchanged. The seam widened one final time, enough to pass through. The alarms reached a new pitch, sharper, more focused, the response teams closing the last few feet, the system converging on a solution it could enforce, but it was already too late. Kaylee's moved first, stepping into the opening without breaking stride, without looking back, and Ethan followed immediately after, leaving behind the structure, the rules, and the version of himself that had ever believed they were the same thing. The transition was not a step, not a jump, but a quiet surrender to something that did not follow the rules he had known. The moment Ethan Cole crossed the threshold, the station vanished without movement, without distance, replaced by an endless field of stillness that felt both immediate and infinite. There was no wind, no sound, no sense of direction, only the faint echo of the device's resonance fading into nothing. For a fraction of a second, he felt weightless in a way that had nothing to do with gravity, as if the concept itself had been paused. Then the world returned, not the station, but something else, a fractured horizon of dim starlight and distant structures drifting like forgotten thoughts. Kaylee stood a few feet ahead of him, steady, grounded, as if she had always belonged to this space. The device in her hand dimmed slowly, its purpose complete. Where are we? Ethan asked, his voice sounding different here, softer, as if the environment absorbed anything unnecessary. Kaylee's turned toward him, her silver eyes reflecting the distant light in a way that felt less alien now, more understood. Between systems, she said, a place your maps do not record. Because they cannot. Ethan took a slow breath. The air was there, but it did not feel processed, did not carry the artificial precision of the station. It felt raw, unfiltered, real in a way he had not noticed he was missing. He looked back instinctively, but there was nothing behind them. No station, no breach, no sign that the place they had left even existed anymore. Only the quiet vastness stretching in every direction. They cannot follow, he said, not as a question, but as a realization. Settling into place, Kaylee shook her head once. Not here, she replied. Their systems rely on certainty, and this place does not offer any. The silence deepened around them, not empty, but full in a way that did not demand attention. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them, the urgency that had driven every movement until now dissolving into something quieter, something heavier. "You knew this would work," he said. Kaylee's held his gaze for a moment before answering. "I knew it could," she said. "The difference matters." Ethan nodded slightly, understanding more than the words alone conveyed. This had never been guaranteed, not the escape, not the survival, not even this moment standing in a place that defied everything he had been trained to trust. "What happens now?" he asked, and for the first time since the chamber, there was no countdown, no approaching footsteps, no system narrowing his options, just a question that did not come with a prescribed answer. Kaylee's looked past him, toward the distant shapes that drifted slowly across the horizon, structures that seemed both constructed and natural, as if they had grown rather than been built. "Now," she said quietly, "you decide who you are without them telling you." The words did not carry pressure. They did not demand anything. They simply existed, an opening rather than an order. Ethan stood there for a moment, the weight of everything behind him still present, but no longer defining. He thought of the chamber, the countdown, the single moment where hesitation had become choice, and how that choice had carried him here, beyond orders, beyond systems, beyond certainty. He let out a slow breath, the kind that did not prepare for what came next, but accepted it. "I already did," he said, his voice steady, not because he was sure of the future, but because he was no longer unsure of himself. Kaylee studied him for a brief second, then inclined her head slightly, not as acknowledgement of rank or authority, but as recognition of something equal, something understood without needing to be explained. The device in her hand dimmed completely, its light fading into the quiet around them, and in that silence, with nothing left to command him and nothing left to resist, Ethan Cole realized that the universe had not changed when he made his choice. Only his place in it had, and for the first time, that was enough.